Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 4 of our Toys and Joys 1929 Ford stake bed truck build. When we left last week's show, we just finished dimensioning that piece of 7/8 thick cherry for the cowl. And while you would think that we're going to continue with that piece to start with this week, we're not. We're going to turn our attention back to our hood and getting that section made up. Well, the side vents for our hood are completely dry. I've unclamped them, and the first thing that we want to do is I want to use that sandpaper that's mounted on the MDF, and we're going to sand the face of them so that we know that it's completely flush all the way along to get a nice smooth surface on the entire area of our vent. So once we have that done, you want to have a look at the plans for this hood. Now, if you look, this is where the hood vents will be. You see they sit here on this side and they'd be right here. Now, they're angled. So what angle does it go? Well, there's no mention of the angle anywhere here. So what I've done is I've taken this little device here and I have used it to measure this angle, and I've measured it at 11 degrees. Now, I didn't want to just take it and cut a piece or cut my good pieces that we've put so much work into at 11 degrees without testing. So I took a scrap piece of plywood and I cut one edge of it here at 11 degrees, and we can just line it up to make sure that it fits properly, and sure enough, it does. So that is the angle that we need to cut. So all you need to do now is measure on here how far back from the vent you need your pieces to be angled. So my suggestion to you, so that you don't mess things up, I've done it before, we all have, lay your pieces on here, right on your drawing, the way that they go with your vents sticking out. And what you want to do, I know this sounds silly, but mark the direction that your angles are going to be cut. They'll be cut just like this. Now, this is not the position of them. This is the direction of them, I guess we'll call it. This way, we're not going to mess it up when we're cutting them, because if you mess it up, you only get one shot here. So now what we can do is we can take this over to the table saw, and using our miter fence, believe it or not, we can cut this so that they are 11 degrees at both ends. And once you get the one end cut on both of your pieces, all you need to do is take some measurements. In this case, they need to be 2.5 inches wide. You can just take the measurements, set your stop on your miter fence, and cut the pieces so that they're both identical length. Even if there is discrepancies as far as the vents, if they're different shapes or sizes or they're a little off center, you're not going to notice that there is no symmetry there, because you cannot see both sides at the same time. So don't fret too much over it, but try to get it as accurate as you can. And now with both of those pieces cut, we're just going to line them up here on our plans to make sure that both the angles and our lengths are correct. And these line up absolutely perfectly. Couldn't get any better than that. So what we need to do now is cut the top of the hood. So with the sides of our hood cut and finished, we need to make the top section of our hood, which is this section right here. Now, again, we're plagued with no measurements, so that's not a problem. In order to get the thickness of the stock that we need, it's a matter of measuring what we have here for the side walls of our hood. You can see the slight taper of the hood right here. So at its thickest point, we can measure the distance here, the total height of the hood, and then just subtract this side here. What you end up with is 1/2 inch thick material. So at this point now, we need to know the shape of our hood. And for that, we can turn our attention to this section of our drawing. And that will give us our shape. If you remember, we measured these angles. They're 11 degrees. So it's not that difficult using the miter fence and a 1/2 inch thick piece of cherry to cut the top of our hood. Just like that. You can compare it to the drawing to make sure everything fits. From here, what we want to do now is we're going to very carefully glue these pieces together, making sure that the edges all line up and that they completely dry and cure before we start messing around with them. Now for these pieces, again, I'm using a straight edge here and just a setup block to hold things together to make it all line up beautifully. I would suggest doing these one side at a time. Give it plenty of time to cure before moving on to the next. There's absolutely no rush here, so just take your time and get them glued together. And at this point you have something that looks like this. Very boxy, very blocky, but that's the process. That's the way it is. So we now need to shape the cowl. So the first thing we're going to do is, not using the plans, using our pieces that we've made, we're going to carefully place a line here marking the top of our hood, just like this. Now we know that this is the high point of our hood right here, but it's also the low point of our cowl. So we will need to shape this down to that line and angle it downwards. We also know that our cowl will angle inward towards our hood. So I'm going to line this up and get everything centered here so that we know what we're looking at. And just like we just did with this top line, we're now going to hold things in place and we're going to draw the line at the sides of our hood. This will mark where our angle needs to be cut. So we can transfer that line onto the top. You can use a sander to do that angle. You can use your table saw and your miter sled after measuring it, whatever you want to do. But that will be the first thing that we're going to need to accomplish there, is to angle this cowl inward on both sides and then slightly down to this line that we just drew. So I measured the angle for the top of the cowl that I need, and for me, for my project, it's 3.5 degrees. So what I've done, I've decided to cut that at the table saw, and I have just tilted my blade 3.5 degrees and then use the table saw to rip that strip off at that angle. Now for the side angles, I measured mine to be 19 degrees. So what I've decided to do is, using my miter gauge, set it to 19 degrees and lop the sides off of it. Now you'll note here that I am using clamps to hold this, not my hands. Keep your fingers away from that blade. And when we're done here, again, we can just do a test fit. Okay, well, I'm pretty happy with the fit of all of this. But now we need to get the slope of the hood. So for this, I've measured off the prints, and the highest part at the back and the front, there's a 1/8 of an inch difference. So all I'm going to do is take my T-rule here. I'm going to place a mark right across the entire hood at 1/8 of an inch. Just like that. And I'm just going to use the belt sander. I'm going to very carefully take this over, sit it flat on the belt sander, and then slowly tilt it into the belt until I meet that line. You just want to make sure that you're not just shaving off this front edge. You want to make it even all the way along. So to assist you with that, if you like, you can put some pencil lines across your hood, and you'll be able to see what areas you're missing. If the pencil lines are still intact, you're not sanding that part. And once again, we're just going to do a little bit of a test fit here. And I'm quite happy with it. I like the way this is lining up. Truth be told, I did have a bigger gap here on the side than what I wanted. and that was because the top of our hood was actually a little proud of our side. It was just a tiny bit, you could barely see it, but when you butted these two pieces together, it wouldn't allow them to lie flush. That's no big deal. I just took the piece like this onto our sandpaper, mounted on the MDF, a few passes, maybe 5-6 passes. It leveled out these edges and allowed everything to sit perfectly flush the way I wanted it. So there we go. There's more shaping to do on this hood as we have to contour the sides, but I'm not going to do that just yet because we want to, at this point, before we get too carried away with shaping this stuff, is I want to cut the rad. Well, I've looked at this rad repeatedly and kind of decided how I want to do it, and I think I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license here. Here's the shape of the rad. We can see it right here, and it says an inset cutout recess of 1/16 of an inch. And then we can see our dotted line here in the front end of this radiator, which is 3/8 of an inch thick. Essentially, what they want you to do is to cut out this recess here of your rad 1/16 of an inch deep. Now, there's several ways you can do that. You could make a template out of this and route it out, making sure to make the template a little bit bigger so that it allows for your bushing, because you'd need a guide bushing for that. Or you could take a piece of whatever species of stock you're going to use, 1/16 of an inch. You could cut this out and then laminate it onto the rest of this here, which would be 5/16 thick. You'd add the other 16th and then you would get 3/8. You could do that if you want. I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license and do something just a little bit different. I don't know if it's going to work out, but we're going to try it. What I've got done here is I have our pattern attached to a piece of 3/8 inch walnut. And what I want to do is I want to transfer the lines of these openings, not exactly, but I want to make it so that I can mark them on the outside just a little bit bigger than what this is, still leaving an edge. So I want to get that marked, and then I'll show you what I'll do with it next. So I've transferred those lines. I'm not sure how correct I am on the top end. I'm worried about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw, and I'm actually going to cut out that top profile. Well, as it turns out, I would have been just fine. But what I want to do at this point is I'm going to set up my trim router. And I'm going to set it up with an upcut spiral bit, a straight bit, and I'm going to very carefully route out this recess on the back. I want to leave approximately about 1/8 of an inch of material here at the edge of it. I know the plans said 1/16, but you don't have to follow what the plans say necessarily. You can use artistic license like what I'm doing here and do your own thing, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get this routed out, and then I'll show you the next step. Well, the very first thing that I want to do here is we need to fasten this down with some double-sided tape. This way it's not going to move while routing it. Just a tip on the double-sided tape, use a clamp to clamp it in place and let it sit there for a minute or two. That will give you really good adhesion and really hold it down tightly for the routing. From there, just take your time and go carefully around. You do not have to go perfectly on this, because it will be hidden on the back side of the rad, but you want to try to be as accurate as you can. So just go slow and take your time and get this recess routed out. And when you're finished with that, you should have something that looks like this. Again, I know it's rough around the edges. You don't have to worry about that because it won't be seen. So from here now, we can take this over to the scroll saw and cut it out, including this recess in the middle. And when you get that done, you should have something that looks just like this. Well, for the interior surface of the radiator, I have a darker piece of walnut, and just like we did with the vents of the hood, I am going to use the 1/16 straight cut router bit, and I am going to cut grooves in this piece of walnut, and then we will custom fit it inside of that recess that we routed out. It may not look pretty from the back side, that's to be expected, but from the front side, the part that you see, it looks spectacular. Well, at this point with the rad done, you should have something that looks like this. And this is where it gets a little funky. We need to do the final shaping on the cowl and on the hood. And I'm going to show you what I think would be the best way to go about it. So let's head over to the bench and I'll show you what I have in mind. Well, what we are looking at here is the front view on the plans of our cab. It shows the rad, the hood, the cowl, and the cab of the truck itself. So what I have done is I have taken that pattern, photocopied it, and I have glued it down onto a scrap piece of 1/4 inch thick MDF. Now, the first thing you need to do is realize what represents what. So this line right here is the outer edge of our rad, which is also the smallest dimension of our hood. This next line here is the largest profile of our hood, but it's also the smallest profile of our cowl. And this back line here, this is the largest line of our cowl, and these curves that go across, well, you know, that's how you want to shape the hood. So the first thing that we want to do is take this over to the scroll saw, and we're going to cut along the outside line, which is the larger dimension of our cowl. And with that, you should have something that looks like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our cowl, line up this template, and using a heavy pencil line, make a very definitive line as to the profile that we require on the large side of our cowl. Okay, just like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this template again over to our scroll saw, and we are going to cut out our next line on the template. And now with that being done, we can turn our cowl over, line up our template with our front edge here, and trace out where it is that we need to shape it. Now as well, this line also is the larger dimension of our hood. So we can take the larger side and again do the exact same thing. Line up our template and trace out the top profile. And now that you have that done, we can cut out our next line, which will give us, you got it, the front edge of our hood. Once you get this part marked, just confirm it that it is the same and that it's going to match up with your radiator that you made. And now there's several ways that you can shape these pieces. If I had it back, truth be told, if I would have thought the process through a little further, I would have never done these slopes already. I would have left those alone to give me more leeway or more wiggle room for shaping. So that's okay. It just goes to show that no matter how experienced you are, sometimes you don't think the whole process through. So you can take this down now with a block plane if you like. You can use a sander. You can do it by hand, chisels, files, sanders, whatever you like. For me, I'm really, I really like to use the belt sander for stuff like this, and that's what I'm going to do. Just taking light passes now because, of course, I've already taken away the material to work with here. I don't want to mess it up and take away too much of that material and lose the height of the hood. And truth be told, once I got the initial shaping done on the sander, I actually opted for my block plane to take down the shape of the hood the rest of the way I want it, to fine tune everything and get it exactly the way I'd like. And when everything here is said and done, you should have something that looks like this. Now my rad's sitting a little low because it's not glued in place, but you can now take these 3 or 4 pieces rather, the cab, the cowl, the hood, and the rad, and glue them to your frame. You just want to be careful here. Glue one piece at a time. Use setup blocks, use squares, use whatever it takes to get things mounted squarely and centered on your frame. It's extremely important for the rest of the model. Everything that gets glued in place affects the next piece. So if your cab is crooked, then your cowl is crooked. If your cowl is crooked, then your hood is crooked. And if your hood is crooked, look what happens to your rad. It no longer fits in that space. It's now all out of whack. So make sure that things are square, make sure that they align, and make sure that you do a test fit of everything first. So I'm going to get this all glued up together here, and I'll show you what we've got at the end of it. Once everything here is dry, I'm not even going to pretend that it's going to be perfect. There are some areas here that are not smooth. They're not lined up exactly the way I would like. And that's where something like this comes in. And all it is, it's a piece of 3/4 inch MDF. I've mounted some pieces of 180 grit sandpaper to it, and we will use them just like files. The flat edges will go a long way to making it so that you get even sanding along without any, if you use your hands, it's a soft section. You will get divots. You don't want those divots. You want it to be smooth. So we can shape the rest of this hood by hand now. It may take some time, but just like I've said for everything else in this build, we are not in a hurry. So I'm going to get that done, but as well, I wanted to show you this. And what this is I've just taken some maple and I've turned the wooden button that will end up being our gas cap for right up here on the cowl. So I will end up cutting this off. I will turn another one once I get the shaping done. That will be our radiator cap on the front end. And I will just drill very carefully a little, I guess a 5/32 diameter hole there to mount it and glue it in. But we will turn our rad and gas caps and glue them in place. I'm not going to do a video of those little turnings because they're the most simple turnings in the world. I mean, really, you just want to take a very light pass, a very light touch, and you'll be just fine. Remember, if you're not happy with it, get rid of it. It's a tiny little piece of wood. It's not like you're wasting much at all. And that should pretty much finish up the body of this for the most part. And that is about all she wrote for this week, guys, as unfortunately we're out of time again. As I've said before on this build, I'm not concerned about the time. I'm not concerned about how many parts this takes. This is all about giving you the confidence that you need to try this model and helping you along the way. I really don't expect anyone to sit through all of these parts from end to end, but if you needed to know how to make a part or how things go together, you could very easily skim through it and watch the sections that you need. And that's what this is about. It's about getting confidence and learning and helping you figure out how to make parts that you may not normally know how to make. I don't know what you think, but we made some great progress today. I think it looks great. I'm very happy with the way it looks. We're going to move on again next week, and you know what? There's a lot more to do on this build, but we're starting to look like a truck now instead of a bunch of blocks of wood. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have a lot of fun here every Tuesday and Friday. It's not all about model builds. There's a lot of variety on this show. We just kind of got hung up on this one, and this is where we're going to hang for a while, and I'm okay with that. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed today's content. I really do. I hope that this series is going to give you the confidence that you need to give one of these models a try, because honestly, they are more fun than I should legally be allowed to have. And guys, more importantly, I honestly hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesday.